When I think about post-production audio, my mind naturally goes to EQ and noise removal, technical things happening inside the computer. But when I compare my work to my favourite films, it seems like there is a huge difference between the sound of the two, and I don't think it's anything to do with software or expensive plugins. We're going to use the example of this little short film thing that we made for this episode. Side note, we made this whole thing in a couple of hours, so just bear that in mind. Regardless of the project, we can always start post-production sound by watching what we've got and writing down every single thing that would make a noise. From footsteps to a door closing in the background, we want as many sounds as possible, but more on that later. So we set up a microphone. I'm using the Rode VideoMic Pro, and we just start going through our list, recording all of those sounds. I really think this is the stage that separates the pros from the beginners. It's a case of trying to find the right sounds from obvious but also less than obvious places. The legendary sound designer Ben Burt suggests that you start with logic, start with the physics of sound. Is it an impact or a scrape? Metallic or soft? But even within that, there are always degrees of intensity. You probably can't use a tiny splash sound for a person falling in a river. You've got to think about the different intensities of footsteps where the character is just walking compared to running. These are all very different things. It becomes more of a performance. And while it makes sense to start with logic and reason, we've always got the artistic license to embellish and exaggerate when needed. Now, if me from 3 years ago was watching this video, I'd be saying, well, that's great, but my films, they don't really have those kind of sounds. I've got dialogue and the odd gunshot, but other than that, the characters don't really do things that make noise. But looking back on that now, I'd say that the reason for that was that there were some major problems with my attitude to sound in pre-production. And we talked all about pre-production in last week's video. I'll put a link on the blog post. So for our little short film thing, we needed the distant sound of some keys jangling. Yeah, it's weird. So when I was recording this, it's tempting to always go for close miking, which sounds like this. But by moving the sound away from the microphone and off axis from its pickup pattern, we can actually get a more realistic sound for something that's supposed to sound far away. Here's a quick comparison. So we need to think about that because a good portion of our soundscape are things that happen off in the distance, like a telephone ringing at the back of an office, or maybe just that kind of low rumbling of loads of people talking in a cafe or a train station. These sounds help give depth because it's telling the audience that, you know what, there are things happening, there is a world that exists outside of that kind of narrow view of the camera. But of course it's still good to give yourself lots of options, and it's this diligence that is what makes it take hours and hours for every single project. Now, it's so easy to forget ambiences and room tone, but they can really bring the mix to life. The obvious ones are the sounds of crickets chirping at night, or maybe that kind of low humming sound of being inside a car. And then there's really heavy rain, which I think can be very emotive, same with heavy wind, but of course you have to think about those a bit earlier on in the process. Just watch the film Seven if you want to see ambient sound used really, really effectively. Now, I think sound libraries can make us lazy, stopping us from going out and finding a really good sound because we found one that will just about fit. But once you've done some recording already, I think it's good to check Freesoundorg. I usually search for sounds under Creative Commons 0. These are from generous people who are giving anyone permission to use their sounds for free on any project. So I think it's a great place to look, but also if we're going to download sounds, we should also upload our own recorded sounds, you know, circle of life and all that, helping each other out. I've already done it for the sounds used in this episode. I'll put that linked on the blog post, and I'll also embed that short film thing that we've been talking about on there as well. So once we've got the sounds from various places, we can bring them into our software of choice, match up the timings, and start layering things together, adding to the dialogue that we recorded on set. Now, even though we've recorded every single footstep and a lot of the really tiny sounds, we're going to probably want most of them to be pretty quiet, pretty low in the mix, so they're just barely noticeable. You can never have too many sounds as long as they're subtle. And sure, there's a whole lot of things we haven't covered this week. EQ, reverb, compression, panning. But you know what, I think most of those things are really just tweaking. If you can get a decent recording up front, then everything afterwards that you do will be pretty minimal. To me, it always comes back to pre-production. If you've got a character who's in a panic, why not have them run out into the street and cause a bunch of cars to honk their horn? That's a really panicky sound. If they've fallen out with someone, why not make the audience listen to them ripping up an old photo? If you've got a frustrated character, get them to throw their bike down on the floor so we can hear their emotion. To begin with, we might have to kind of force these opportunities to use sound into our films. But I reckon after a while, we'll get quite used to it to the point where it's a very natural way to help deliver the emotion of that scene. And to my mind, that's pretty much what sound is all about. That's how we can tell stories with sound. My name's Simon Cade, this has been DSLR Guide, and I'll see you next week.